What's up, guys? My name's Stu, and today we're looking at my theory-crafted stats for the Ark Royale carrier. The legendary Akira has been announced and is coming to Star Trek Online very soon, which means I'm gonna need a new ship to obsess over that isn't in the game yet. I'm sure some of you are already clamoring to say, why not the Curie, or the Jaeger, or the Typhon, and it's because they're hideous. Star Trek Starfleet Command 2's Ark Royale class carrier, however, that's a good-looking ship. Not only is it a motion picture era ship, which I still say Star Trek Online is in desperate need of more of those, but it's also a ship that looks like both a carrier and a Federation starship, which a lot of the carriers in the game really don't do both. There's the Jupiter, but the Jupiter doesn't really look like a Starfleet ship to me. It looks like the Battlestar Galactica having an identity crisis and an allergic reaction at the same time. There's also the Seneca class, but I mean, we all know what the Seneca class looks like, and I don't mean the dilithium freighter from Star Trek Armada. And there's also the recent Monitor class, but really that's just a Sutherland class with a different pod. It's an interesting idea, but it doesn't scream full-fledged carrier to me. It really just screams yet another version of the Nebula class. And really, whenever I'm flying that ship, I just want to fly the Nebula class skin, because I like the Nebula class. I want something that both looks and feels like an actual carrier, and that's what I think the Ark Royale is. I'm also doing this theory craft not just because I have a specific idea for Space Barbie for a Federation carrier, but also because I've also got a very specific idea for stats for what I want to see in a carrier, particularly in the bridge officer seating, which you'll see once I get into the stats. Like with my other theory craft videos, the first thing I did was start out with 10 other ships that are similar to what I'm looking to make, and honestly that was really easy because there are literally only 10 different Tier 6 carriers in Star Trek Online at this current point. I mean, yeah, technically there's, a C-Store version and a fleet version of both the Seneca and the Jupiter, and, there's like 4 different versions of the sport carrier, but their stats are all virtually identical. So, I mean, in terms of like actual unique starships, there are 10 different carriers. So it made coming up with this list pretty easily. First up on the comparison list, we've got the C-Store and Fleet ships, so the recent Terran Monitor, the Fleet Jupiter, the Fleet Seneca, the T6 support carriers, and the Jem'Hadar Vanguard carrier. Then the Lockbox and Lobi ships, of which there are only 2 carriers, the Kelvin Timeline Talaru Intel carrier warbird and the Tholian Jorogomo carrier, which that's the Lobi ship. And then there's the 3 event ships, the Jarok, the Goktad, and the Sarthlen, I don't know how to pronounce that, the Breen carrier. Now, because the Ark Royale is a TMP era ship, I'm guessing it's not going to be a huge ship, at least not in comparison to some of the other carriers in Star Trek Online, because, it's a 23rd century ship, so it doesn't make sense for it to be, insanely bigger than, say, like the Constitution class. Obviously, it's going to be bigger because it's a carrier, but I wouldn't think it would be immensely huge, not like the support carriers. So in comparison to some of these others, I decided to go a bit light on the hull and shield modifier in favor of increasing the turn rate, impulse rating, and inertia rating. Sacrificing durability for speed. It's still a carrier, so it's not going to be a lot of speed, but I did decide to make the turn rate 8.5 to kind of emulate the Talaru. The impulse rating is 0.18, which again, that is the highest one among these others. So like the Jem'Hadar Vanguard carrier, the Talaru, and the Jorogomo. And the inertia rating is 35, which again, that is the highest that you see among these others. I was a little tempted to push the impulse mod to 0.19 just to kind of push it a little ahead of the others, just to give it a bit more unique and to more emphasize on the speed. I still might do that, but again, this is just a theory craft. It doesn't really matter all that much, honestly, but it's an idea to throw out. For the power bonuses, plus 10 to weapons, plus 10 to aux power. I wanted this to be a little bit more weapons focused, which is why I gave it plus 10 to weapons, and also why I made the weapons layout 4-2, unlike the usual 3-3 that most of these have. Despite being a science carrier, I wanted the ship to be a little more weapons focused than some of these other carriers, because most carriers, despite lacking a secondary deflector, they're really focused on their science seating, and I wanted to give this a little bit more of an edge with the weapons. It's not going to be a huge edge, obviously, because it's still a science carrier, but I mean, it's a playstyle I think that most of the player base would find more favorable instead of like a standard science carrier's layout where you're much more focused on all of your science abilities. But I did also give it +10 to Oct power because I would like it to also have the option to be a little bit more sciencey. Or I say sciencey, it's a carrier, so it would really be more support-y. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. Further leaning into that idea of both being able to do damage and support, that is also why I decided to make this a command ship. Not because I wanted it to be a torpedo build like I usually want command ships to be, but because, like I said, I wanted to lean into more of that, mix of damage and support. So that way you can both, support your teammates as well as your own fighter pets, which as a carrier, that's kind of what you should be focusing on in order to do more damage, is to support your fighter pets. But this way the ship itself can also do some of its own damage output as well. Very similar to how the Talaru is set up. I gave the Ark Royale 3 device slots just because whether or not a carrier has 3 or 4 device slots seems to be a little inconsistent, because I mean the Jem'Hadar carrier, it only has 3, but I'm thinking it's because that's got a 4-2 weapons layout. Same with the Talaru. The Gok'Tad has a 4-3 weapons layout, which that's a bit of an outlier. That's kind of weird. I was a little tempted to emulate that weapons layout, but I figured that would be kind of pushing it. And this is a Fakiri ship, so they're meant to be kind of weird. But I think that's why it has 3 device slots. But then so does the Monitor, which makes no sense to me because that has a 3-3 weapons layout. The only other difference it has between the other carriers is that the Monitor is a full Miracle Worker ship. But again, Miracle Worker really, that's just the specialization. It's not different enough to warrant skimping on some of the device slots. So I'm wondering maybe if that was an error that no one noticed, or maybe it was supposed to have a 4th weapon slot in the front, which I would very much like to have because frankly that would make the ship a lot better. But that's a rant for a different video. But like I said, that's why I went with the 3 device slots for the Ark Royale, because I did give this a 4-2 weapons layout. The bridge officer seating, this is always the hardest part about these theory crafts, just getting this just the way I want it, and I feel like I've done that here with a Lieutenant Commander tactical seat, a Lieutenant Engineering seat, a Commander Science/Command seat, an Ensign level Science seat, and a Lieutenant Commander Universal/Pilot seat. That's right, I did say a pilot seat, and the whole reason I want this thing to have a pilot seat is so that it can use reinforcement squadrons. I want the Ark Royale to be the ultimate pet build ship, so not only will it have 2 hangar bays full of fighters of its own, but with that pilot seat, it'll also be able to use reinforcement squadrons to summon in even more pets. And it doesn't end with that pilot seat, because with the command seat, it'll also be able to use call emergency artillery, which that's even more pets. They won't function like, the other pets that will, because they're literally they function more like projectiles, but they are registered as pets. But basically, you're going to have a true command carrier commanding multiple wings of hangar pets, and also being able to call in a trio of artillery vessels at just the hit of a button. Now, you can already get kind of close to this with both the Seneca and the support carriers, because both of them have a command seat, so you'll be able to use call emergency artillery on them, but they lack the pilot seat. In fact, none of these other carriers have a pilot seat, so there is no other carrier that is able to use reinforcement squadrons, and honestly, I always felt like that was kind of a missed opportunity. Not to suggest that reinforcement squadrons is a particularly good ability, because frankly, it's not, but I mean, it's for a theme build, because, theme is fun. That's kind of what I do a lot on this channel, and as a theme aspect to it, a pilot seat makes complete sense on a carrier. So yeah, I want reinforcement squadrons on a full carrier, because I want to just spam pets like crazy, because I'm a crazy person who wants tiny little minions to do my bidding. The rest of these stats are pretty straightforward. In the consoles, 4 tactical, 3 engineering, and 4 science. Because frankly, anything beyond the tactical consoles, it's pretty pointless, because the rest of it's going to be consumed by universal consoles anyway. But I did want the 4 tactical consoles because, just like I said earlier, I want this to have a good balance of either DPS output or support, so you can kind of switch between the two depending on what build you're running. Though, honestly, if you cut the tactical consoles down to 3 and moved it to somewhere else, honestly, it wouldn't be a huge loss just because once you use a experimental upgrade on the ship, you'll get a universal console, so that's one more console that you can use for tactical anyway. And the rest of it, hangar bays, you know, there's 2, obviously, because it's a carrier. Science Carrier Mastery Package, just like everything else on this list, except for the Talaru, which has the Science Carrier Warbird Package, which is a little unique because it's got Singularity Couriers in mind. And that's, I think, an important distinction here that I haven't made clear yet. What I have in mind here is a pure science carrier, not a flight deck carrier, not a dreadnought carrier, just a normal carrier, because science carriers are the ones that really need help. You know, flight deck carriers, they're not struggling at all. Dreadnought carriers, they're not struggling. The only problem with either of them is just that there aren't many of them in the game. But yeah, science carriers, they're the ones that need help, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the thinking in mind here. Is I want carriers to be more pet focused instead of more science focused, and I think that's always been the flaw in the thinking with science carriers. The idea with them is that people want more sciencey stuff out of them because they're called science carriers, but really they should just drop the science entirely and just call them normal carriers, or just call them carriers. So stop talking about the science abilities and what you could do to buff them, because frankly, I don't think that's what carriers should be designed for. They should be designed for dealing damage or support, if you prefer, with your hangar bay pets, not with your actual abilities like you do on a normal science vessel. Because that's the whole identity of a carrier, you know? It carries the fighters into battle or to wherever they're going, and the fighters do the majority of the work, mainly the damage output or the support, depending on what kind of fighters that you're using. And then the carrier kind of lays back and provides set of support to the fighter pets. And with this thinking, I just kind of want to ramp that up to 11, because that's why I wanted to make it a command ship, so it can better provide support. And why I wanted it to have a pilot seat, so it can summon in even more fighter pets. And with that statement, that covers the spec seating. So the primary seat, which is the full commander level specialization seat, that's a command seat, and then a secondary pilot seat, which I have at lieutenant commander, just because I didn't want to stick with just like the base level of reinforcement squadrons. I wanted to have at least, you know, the level 2 version. You can't go level 3 just because that's a commander level ability in pilot, and yeah, as amusing as a full pilot carrier would be, there's no way they're gonna do a full pilot carrier. It doesn't work as a carrier. You're not gonna see a carrier doing barrel rolls. That's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, full command ship, no special abilities, you know, I mean, there really isn't much here on the other carriers to begin with. I mean, the Vanguard ship has the Vanguard wingmen, which of course they do, because it's a Vanguard ship. Something I really wish they would start putting on other ships, because no one wants to fly Jem'Hadar ships. I'm sorry, but Jem'Hadar ships, who cares? I want a Starfleet version of the wingman mechanic, or a KDF version, or a Romulan version. But the wingman mechanic is too fun just to keep it confined to the Jem'Hadar Vanguard ships. It needs to be adapted to be fitted to other factions, because otherwise it's never going to get used, which sucks because it is arguably one of the most fun ship mechanics. And frankly, I would love to see it here too, because that's literally 2 more pets for my pet themed build. So yeah, sorry, mini rant over, but because I've talked about this before, but yeah, Vanguards shouldn't just be Jem'Hadar. It's dumb at this point. And yeah, no cloaking device, because, you know, it's a Federation ship. Particularly it's a TMP era Federation ship, so it definitely wouldn't have a cloaking device. Oh, I almost forgot to bring this up. Another reason why I wanted this to be a command ship is because this is a TMP era starship, and as we know from the Legendary Akira announcements, we are getting new TMP era fighter pets. The new Kodai fighters have a unique ability that meshes really well with command ships, because every time you use one of the inspiration abilities, you'll get an extra torp spread out of the fighters. So, you know, TMP fighters, TMP carrier, it just makes sense that the two should be able to synergize like that. So that's another reason to justify my choice as a command carrier for the Ark Royale. So yeah, that is what I have in mind for the Ark Royale command carrier. Like with my other theory crafts, this is just me, you know, doing a thought exercise. There is no reason to believe that Cryptic will, you know, take any of this into account when building an actual ship, if they ever get around to doing the actual Ark Royale, because again, there's no reason to believe that they actually will. We can hope, but that's about it. But yeah, be sure to let me know down in the comments down below what you thought of this theory craft. Do you like it? Are there some changes that you'd make? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, be sure to hit like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member, hit the super thanks button, or find the link to the merch store in the link in the description. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store for video games, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. It doesn't cost anything extra for you, but it does help with the channel, so I'd really appreciate it. Either way, my name's Stu. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.